how psychedelics might work in terms of creativity, because it's, creativity, as already mentioned, is complex and multifaceted. And I think psychedelics impart a complex, multifaceted kind of effect. You've obviously, you've got multiple things happening at the same time. Enhanced visualization ability, enhanced access to the subconscious, a more uncensored, more unedited data stream from your subconscious and the way you look at the world. You've got greater empathy, you've got greater connection, you've got less fear, less inhibition, less fear of failure. That's an important and overlooked aspect of creativity. And then also inspiration is a sometimes overlooked aspect of creativity. That initial spark that sets you down a path, like a more freely associative way of thinking. So connecting dots between things that you wouldn't normally in your sober state tend to connect. You've got.
Let me take you where one of the areas where I have some knowledge is microdosing for creativity. And what people report, and again, when I say report, on a couple of hundred reports of people who find that when they microdose, they function normally but better. And one of the ways that they focus better, they say, I am not higher creative, but I am more creative. Meaning I can focus more easily. I can pay attention to more variables simultaneously. I am less likely to have my own prejudices interrupt my thought flow. It's not massive. It's simply using what you already know and functioning better. And that's a different kind of breakthrough, but it's enormously popular. And having been interviewed by a whole lot of journalists, one of the things I say to them is it's particularly good for first drafts. And what I've gotten back in a number of cases are, I know, that's why I'm writing this story on you in the first place, or, oh my God, you're right. It was very easy writing this story because and so forth. So again, journalists are this wonderful underground of scientists, researchers that we don't give full credit to. But the discoveries that we're finding for creativity are that, not surprisingly, that if your whole system is working better, your creativity is working better too. And that's a fundamental.
Push the envelope a little bit in terms of, psychedelics don't just have potential uses for mental health conditions. I think even people so-called on normal healthy volunteers, if you like, the functional neurotics can benefit potentially from these things for all kinds of issues like creative problem solving and enhancing connectivity and ecological consciousness. So I think creativity is a really important subject to explore.
Yeah, I think I mentioned this on the podcast a while ago, so people have probably heard this story before, but our teacher Lenny was chatting with Stan Groff, and this was, I don't even know, probably like 15 plus years ago, saying like, oh, isn't this exciting? Like, all this like research is starting to come back, and Stan said, a lot of it's been done in the mental health field, but the real potential here is in creativity. So Jim, I don't know, I'd be curious to hear some of your thoughts around that comment.
Well, I was just kind of musing on, wouldn't it be nice if the research was on mental health? It isn't so far. It's, as we know, been medicalized, which is not what the indigenous uses for the past few thousand years were. But what's wonderful is what the paper brings back is that that altered states is part of the human condition. And there are ways of inducing it. One we know is going to sleep. And that we all have been practicing. Another, obviously, is extreme fatigue, stress, etc. These are all areas where breakthroughs occur. Well, it's an important cultural topic, which is one of the questions is a cultural system producing an educational system that allows, that supports creativity, and at which we can literally measure when we look at patents, and there are ways of measuring functional creativity. So we're looking at creativity functionally as well as theoretically.
I mean, yeah, and I would add, creativity in all its forms is considered perhaps one of the most highly valued and highly prized of human traits. I mean, it's a big part of the fuel that got us to where we are today, having this, conversation, each of us in different parts of the world, interconnected through the mycelial interwebs, and having this conversation now. That's down to scientific, technological creativity and innovation. And one of the aspects of creativity is allowing us to adapt to a changing environment, to a changing world. So any potential avenues at all, even if like the promise of creativity isn't guaranteed, it doesn't need to be guaranteed. Even if there's the possibility of harnessing or enhancing creativity in some way, even the mere possibility, I think, makes this area kind of worthy of exploration.
The Celtic knot mandalas I create, they are mostly inspired by what I observe in nature. The colors and the shapes. So having reconnected to Mother Earth really also inspires creativity to flow. And what else is the flow state if not a merging with the environment, relaxing into it, basically losing that persona self and letting it do through you whatever comes through, and it becomes effortless. And you tap into something, and then you just get new ideas from somewhere.
In shamanism, how shamans gain knowledge of the objects of studies is rather than being detached, you become that which you want to learn more about.
Yeah, this is something which underpins the whole of Amerindian cosmology, and Amerindian cosmology is underpinned by the use of psychedelics, and that is, it's a totally different type of epistemology to that of Western science. Is that if you want to know something, you become that thing you want to understand. You transform into it and you understand it from a first person perspective. It's like the ultimate kind of subjectivity. Not without it's problematic. It may not be a genuine kind of subjective enmeshing, but it gives you this kind of different insight. In the same way, the objectivity of science isn't completely objective either. You can't really divorce yourself. But, Western science aims to be objective and attempts to do science through this process. And yet, particularly where innovation and discovery is concerned, there may be a lot to be gained by having this more kind of subjective perspectivism of transformation into the other, which we do see in altered states and creative problem solving, particularly with psychedelics. Merlin Sheldrake, in his recent book, he was a participant in one of our LSD trial. He had this experience. He was trying to work out 3 years of PhD research on the relationship between this fungus and a plant, and he still had no idea. And then, under the influence of LSD, he turned into the fungus and saw that his whole, years of research, it turned on its head and looked at it in a completely different way. And so I think, there's probably room in the way we do science for having this more kind of ultra subjective approach to it, at least in the kind of innovative kind of stage, in the kind of what's the first stage of creativity, that kind of like the immersion stage where you kind of get your ideas, I think, and then you go away and test them, perhaps not in an altered state of consciousness, right, in a more objective way. But I think, Western scientists cut themselves off from that. That becomes completely taboo to do that kind of work. It's this kind of thing that never would go into a scientific research paper for us.
See, I think we have to acknowledge that the word scientism, meaning science as a religious doctrine, which you are punished for going outside of. And it's not much different from Catholic Orthodoxy or any religious orthodoxy that has as a doctrine that things outside it are either don't exist or are bad. Okay, and we all know that, I wish there was a nice term for parapsychology, but we know it's a derogatory term. Except that everyone has had experiences of it. When I was a first-year graduate student at Stanford and finding psychology truly limited because I had recent psychedelic experiences, I carried with me a little what's called a Zehner pack. It's a pack of 5 cards with 5 different symbols. It's used in standard parapsychology research. And every once in a while, when I was with my other graduate students, I would mention it and comment, and they would universally, tell me what a stupid jerk I was and how silly this was, and grow up, Fatima. And then I would just kind of wait, and someone then would say, my grandmother, and they would tell this story of divination, of parapsychology, of talking with the dead, or whatever it was, and then someone else would chime in with someone, the women in my family, and then I would just listen to these stories and put my cards away. So that right below the orthodoxy, and we were going to be the new priesthood of orthodoxy, was human experience. And those human experiences are much easier to accept if they're in your family. But you can't put them in a journal, because the journal is orthodoxy. And it's very clear. Having been rejected by a number of interesting journals, I can assure you that orthodoxy is alive and well, and is a limitation. It's not evil. It's just their problem is not that they're not good at what they do. Their problem is that they don't acknowledge there are other ways. I think we've all said we're at the edge of a couple of other possible revolutions. These are huge shifts back to, again, what do indigenous people do when they need a medication? They go out and find where it grows. We are returning to that, but at the level of a large civilization. That's massive. We're also taking in what we've talked about, a lot of experiences and a lot of parts of consciousness that science has prevented us from looking at for quite a while due to its dominance. And when a culture falls apart, into the cracks come all of these alternatives